Cultural Alliance, the Theatre Alliance of Buffalo, Art Services Initiative, 43 North, Buffalo Philharmonic Orchestra, galleries big and small.
The arts and cultural sector benefits from having strong leaders, and that's what we'll be preparing. As we continue to move into challenging times within the arts and cultural sector, we're going to need to have experienced leaders who have that bedrock skills that we are providing within this program.
The one-on-one mentorship that students get here.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Emily Burns-Perryman, and I'm the Vice President for Institutional Advancement at Daemen College. The Department of Visual and Performing Arts, in association with the Nancy Haberman Gacioch Entrepreneurship Lecture Series at Daemen College, is proud to welcome Bill Siemering as the inaugural speaker for the new Bachelor of Science in Leadership and Entrepreneurship in the Arts program. As a pioneering leader in the arts, and as the first program director for National Public Radio, Bill Siemering will help launch a program dedicated to equipping graduates with the skills needed to become leaders and entrepreneurs in the cultural sector. Bill, whose career not only influenced the cultural life nationally, but also the development of radio in Africa, will speak about how the arts are received by communities as a gift. He will also discuss the importance of mission and wise hiring practices to arts organizations, the origins and growth of NPR, and the global reach and responsibility of radio. A moderated question and answer session will follow the presentation tonight. Before we hear from Bill, I would like to introduce Dr. Robert Waterhouse, Chair, Associate Professor of Theater, Department of Visual and Performing Arts here at Daemen College. Bob?
Thank you, Emily. Before I turn things over to our speaker today, I just need to thank some people. Our program in Leadership and Entrepreneurship in the Arts grew out of a focus group with over 30 leading organizations and professionals here in Buffalo. So while there are too many people to thank now, I did want to extend a special thanks to Randy Kramer and his staff at Musical Fair for being kind enough to host us, Tony Billoni, who facilitated on that day, and Christina Coyle-Lenz, Jen Swan of Arts Services Initiative for her continued support, Emily Burns-Perryman and her team here at Daemen, Susan Marchioni and her team, and Dr. Mike Brogan, Senior Vice President for Academic Affairs and Dean of the College. This evening, my colleague, Professor Dan Shanahan, Director of Entrepreneurial Studies here at Daemen, will moderate the chat after the presentation. The generosity that has distinguished all our partners on the program flows in rivers from our inaugural speaker. Bill Siemering's wisdom about the arts and about life is a gift in itself. Now a senior fellow at the Wingcoat Foundation, Bill was a founding member of the NPR Board of Directors and wrote the original mission and goals. He was hired to implement that mission as NPR's first director of programming and helped develop All Things Considered and Fresh Air Terry Gross into national programs. Bill began working overseas in 1993 as a recipient of a MacArthur Foundation Fellowship. For 2 years, he worked with the Open Society Foundation, focused on Eastern Europe, Africa, and Mongolia. In 2004, he founded Developing Radio Partners to enrich the programming of local stations in Africa on climate change and health for women and youth. Bill Siemering, the mic is yours.
Thanks, Bob. It's a very nice introduction. And it's such a pleasure to be with you. I spent 8 wonderful, happy years in Buffalo. They were probably one of the most enjoyable, experimental, and fun years I had in radio because we had a small station and we could be experimental and try anything, as you'll hear. And so it's wonderful to be here with a new project, a new beginning here with a Bachelor of Science in Leadership Entrepreneurship in the Arts, which the Daemen leadership and faculty wisely initiated to eliminate the cliche about the starving artist. How many parents advise their children not to major in the arts because they could never make a living that way? Now, Daemen College will give you the knowledge, experience, and skills to thrive in the arts. Imagine your life is a weaving, and each thread is an experience, a turning point, a pivotal person in your life. What are the threads in your life that brought you here today? Today, I'll be showing some of my threads. Looking at leadership, if this were a class, we could list the qualities you think would make for good leadership. It would be as good as those I found in my Google search. However, John Quincy Adams said, if your actions inspire others to dream more, learn more, do more, and become more, you are a leader. But you see, this is the result of how you act and who you are. You never go about saying, I'm going to inspire others. But someday, someone will include you in their threads of a person who changed their life. Because radio people tend to be on the shy side, we tend to like to be heard but not seen. So I'm going to share a screen now. So whatever you do, one of the most important things is, whether it's a project or an organization, ask, what are my intentions? What is the purpose? What do I consider success? This will be the North Star to guide you. Be mindful also of the relationship you have with your audience in the arts. Lewis Hyde, in his book, The Gift, wrote, that art that matters to us, which moves the heart, or revives the soul, or delights the senses, or offers courage for living. However we choose to describe the experience, that work is received as a gift is received. It's the cardinal difference between gift and commodity exchange, that a gift establishes a feeling bond between two people, while the sale of commodity leaves no necessary connection. As we're poised to begin something new here, Bishop Oscar Romero offers a thoughtful perspective. We plant seeds that will one day grow. We water seeds already planted, knowing they will hold future promise. We lay foundations that will need further development. We provide yeast that produces effects far beyond our capabilities. We cannot do everything, and there's a sense of liberation realizing that. This enables us to do something and do it very well. What I'd like to do now is look at NPR as a successful model of leadership, entrepreneurship, and the arts. This is where NPR is today. There's more to tell. Well, because of COVID, listening to the radio has declined. It has increased on other platforms. Unique visitors to NPR have increased 94%. Nearly 30% more have asked Alexa to stream NPR programs. And traffic on NPR Music on YouTube has increased 90%. And out of 900,000 podcasts, NPR is the leading publisher. You may be thinking, wait a minute, Mr. Bill, how is a radio an arts organization? Well, think of it as an oral gallery of classical art, another gallery of contemporary art, The little tiny desk concert showcased emerging artists and established ones, including Alicia Keys, Taylor Swift, and Adele. When I was at WBFO, we broadcast the Festival of the Arts from the Albright Knox Art Gallery. We reproduced student paintings in our program guide. An artist talked about them on the air. Then a musician composed music based on those paintings. Marianne Amache, a creative associate at the university, created the first in a series of city links using 8 microphones placed around the city and mixed them for, yes, 28 hours. Radio was an instrument for the art itself. And this really launched her career in the kind of music that she was creating. As for the entrepreneurship, 70% of NPR's income is split between corporate underwriting and station fees. So how did all this start? Well, we'll go way back. During the Civil War, President Lincoln wanted universities to provide practical information on agriculture and established land-grant universities. As you see, the president of the University of Wisconsin had a much broader vision to reach every home. This became the Wisconsin idea that the boundaries of the campus are the boundaries of the state. When these physics professors invented radio in 1917, it was the ideal way to make this vision a reality. The idea that the state-supported university had a mission to use radio was embedded from the beginning. This mural is in Radio Hall, and I saw it every day when I worked there. The first programs provided farmers with weather, market, and crop information. With these agricultural roots, it was natural to call this new invention a broadcast, which meant to scatter seeds. I attended a 2-room country school outside of Madison, not quite as nice as this one. A 2-room school means that 6 grades are divided in half, so 2 teachers work with 3 grades. None of our families had much money, and some were so poor they bought cold pancakes for lunch. My mother advocated for a hot lunch program and succeeded. I learned if you see a need, find a solution. One day, when I was in 1st grade, some boys started picking on 2 black girls, and I instinctively intervened to stop it. 80 years later, I remember their names, Lois and Ellen Waldron, because Ellen, in gratitude, ran over and kissed me. My older sister saw this and told my parents, so it became kind of a family story. It's my earliest memory of standing for fairness. 3 teachers, teaching 3 classes really was not easy, and most rural schools have limited resources. So they welcomed programs from the Wisconsin School of the Air. The teacher's manual as a guide to prepare for the broadcast, it was a fine educational experience. So I learned art and music and nature studies, social studies, and science, all from radio. So from that 1st grade, I learned that radio was a source for information and imagination. When I was in 8th grade, Linda, my math teacher, asked if I liked to work on her farm, and I did, pictured here in this watercolor. Her husband, Henry, and I went farm to farm, baling hay and combining grain. At noon, when we went in for lunch, the farmer would turn on the radio for the farm program. So I heard how radio could improve livelihoods. When I started my freshman year at the university, I worked at the station, first as an engineer, then worked as an on-air announcer, newscaster, and actor. Later, I moved to Buffalo to manage the then student radio station, WBFO. To learn about the diversity in the area, I produced a series of programs with the Tuscarora Native Americans called A Nation Within a Nation. I also walked through the Black community in the Fruit Belt doing an informal porch-to-porch survey on their media use and interests. Out of this, I produced a series of programs on what it's like to be a Black person in America. It was the early 60s, so it was called To Be Negro. I realized that Black voices should be heard. So I set up a studio in the heart of the Black community on Jefferson Avenue when 27 Hours a Week originated. We sponsored a Black Arts Festival, and people brought in their photographs, paintings, poems, and we had live jazz. All of these experiences informed me when I was asked to, as a member of the founding board of directors, to write the original purposes. I wanted to differentiate NPR from the present educational radio, from commercial radio, and PBS. And I also wanted to affirm the unique strengths of radio. I wanted to be both aspirational and practical. These flowers represent people, which come in various sizes, shapes, and colors. So here are things that I wrote, a few of the paragraphs. National Public Radio will serve the individual. It will promote personal growth. It will regard individual differences with respect and joy rather than derision and hate. It will celebrate the human experience as infinitely varied rather than vacuous and banal. It will encourage a sense of active, constructive participation rather than apathetic helplessness. The total service should be trustworthy, enhance intellectual development, expand knowledge, deepen oral aesthetic enjoyment, increase the pleasure of living in a pluralistic society, and result in a service to listeners which makes them more responsive, informed human beings, and intelligent, responsible citizens of their communities and the world. And then in describing the editorial attitude or principles for what became often considered, I wrote, "It will not substitute superficial blandness for genuine diversity of regions, values, and cultural and ethnic minorities which comprise American society. It would speak with many voices and many dialects. The editorial attitude would be that of inquiry, curiosity, concern for the quality of life, critical, problem-solving, and life-loving. The listener should come to rely upon it as a source of information of consequence, that having listened has made a difference in their attitude toward the environment and themselves. And then listeners should feel that the time spent with NPR was among their most rewarding in media contact. National Public Radio will not regard its audience as a market or in terms of its disposable income, but as curious, complex individuals who are looking for some understanding, meaning, and joy in the human experience." So on February 25th in 1970, the day before NPR was incorporated, I had an opportunity to put these ideas to a test as a riot broke out on campus that went on for 3 weeks. We broadcast interviews, panel discussions, town hall meetings, in all 140 hours. Jack Allen wrote in the Buffalo Courier Express, "WBFO is a beacon of light and reason amid passionate voices which scream from all sides of the political spectrum. It would be difficult for a person of any persuasion to prove bias or failing to give every side its time on the air." This experience gave me confidence that I was on the right track. The immediacy of this live coverage of events made for compelling listening. So buoyed by this, I continued with an afternoon program that included interviews with writers, and there were many at the university, including John Barth, Leslie Frieder, Robert Creeley. The program also included music and reports. A reporter may come back from city council meeting and say, "Listen to what Councilman Lewandowski had said," and he'd play a clip, and we'd say, "You can hear that whole story on the news tonight. I called it "This is Radio" because I was so annoyed with people dissing on radio, not respecting it. I meant, this is radio, damn it, pay attention. Terry Gross hosted it as a student. Later, when she and the producer moved to Philadelphia, they renamed it Fresh Air. Now moving on to NPR. Looking back, I think that one of my strengths has been hiring good people and then managing as I would like to be managed. By that, I mean having a clear sense of purpose, what was expected of me, and to be left alone as much as possible. I think I was more like a recruiter for a symphony orchestra. Perhaps the purposes served as a way of tuning their instruments to middle C. It's the NPR staff, of course, that make the music. I think I've been given too much credit. I was only there on the staff for 2 years and 1 month. So one other pointer for managing, show appreciation. Eric Newsom, a leader in audio production, extends this to life in general and recommends showing appreciation to someone every day. So today I'm grateful for Professor Waterhouse for inviting me here and guiding me in developing this talk. The mechanics of radio are really easy to learn, but you can't teach curiosity. So it's well to look at the passion a person has or their strong interest for something, for the job you're looking to fill. The first person I hired was Carolyn Welch as the researcher librarian because accuracy was essential. Truth is a sacred trust in broadcasting and anything else. Carolyn went on to become a superb producer. I knew from my years at WHA that women are excellent broadcasters. Aline Hazard was this model producer and host of the Homemakers program, the most popular program on air. She taught in China for several years and was smart and tough. As it happened, I hired quite a few women because they were the best candidates for the job. This included Susan Stamberg. She exudes curiosity. Her voice is expressive with rich tone color, and she has a strong air presence. Just like stage presence, you need an air presence. Not every reporter makes a good host. At the same time, she only wanted to work part-time because she had a young son. However, the next year, and we're marking this today, March 1st, 1972, Susan became the first woman to host a national news program. Think about that, how far we've come, and how that seemed like a revolution in a way. But as I say, I didn't give it a second thought. It's a sound I wanted for all things considered. We didn't have the journalistic heft. This is Susan today. We didn't have the journalistic heft in radio that they do in print. So I hired Cleve Matthews as the news director. Cleve had been an editor at the Washington Bureau of the New York Times. And it was an easy transition from print to radio. We have more in common with print than with television. We can work by ourselves and we write without pictures. Cleve was the anchor for the news department. Cleve came along, and along with him was Robert Conley, who'd also worked on the Times and NBC. Robert was the first host of All Things Considered. This is the way the first program sounded.
Janice, in her struggle to break away from addiction. We'll have a portrait of Janice later in the... From National Public Radio in Washington, I'm Robert Conley with All Things Considered.
once you start doing the drug often enough to get to the point where when you wake up in the morning, your nose is running and your stomach is cramping. And, you can't stand for someone to come in there and holler at you. You're totally different. And you're spitting up from the bed to the toilet. You sick. And Harry has knocked on your door.
That anguish surrounds the life of a mother and nurse we call Janice in her struggle to break away from addiction. We'll have a portrait of Janice later in the program. We'll also look into what some barbers are up to in Iowa, trying to stimulate business. Some, though not all, because one barber says the new service makes him too nervous. But in the top of the day's news, the crush, catcalls, flux and flow of the demonstrations in Washington against the war in Southeast Asia. As a result of those demonstrations today, somewhere between 6,500 and 7,000 protesters have been picked up by the police.
All right. So some of you are probably saying, Mr. Bill, why did you have that nurse as the first voice to be heard? We were making a statement that we will talk with people, not about them. We go to primary sources, to people that are experiencing life. We will hear voices that are never heard before. As I said, it would be with many voices and many dialects. So that was a conscious decision to do it that way. Then we have this, a 23-minute documentary, and here's an excerpt from that.
Thousands of young people came to Washington willing to risk being arrested in order to end the war. They went into the streets this morning to stop the government from functioning by clogging many Washington roads during this morning's rush hour. For many demonstrators, the mobile street tactics of civil disobedience are an expected spring event. But before today, many other young people who came to Washington had not been willing to oppose the state with their bodies. For these young Americans, today was a major test of their commitment to the ethical code of the young and the angry. It was their freedom ride, their Selma March, their May Day.
Stop the war now! 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 Stop the war now!
1, 2, 3 Army helicopters flying surveillance over this small section of Washington's complicated highway system. A line of young people has just come across the highway. Traffic is stopped. And here come the police. 1, 2, 3, 4 police on motor scooters. One demonstrator knocked down by a motor scooter policeman. Anger now. Anger of the young people. And here come more police.
Come on, people!
The demonstrators just told a motorcycle sergeant that one of his men did knock one of the demonstrators down.
All right, where? Let me get an ambulance down there for you. Motor 3 on the Southwest Freeway. Have one injured down here. Could you send me an ambulance, please? It's right at Main Avenue.
And he hit the kid. He went right through the line.
Past me and almost knocked me down. And
Yeah, but it's policeman we're talking about. A motorcycle. Policeman.
motorcycle
hit him, not a citizen. Right there, the man over there, right there.
Sergeant, excuse me, Jeff Kamen, National Public Radio. Is that a technique where the men actually try to drive the bikes into the demonstrators?
No, it's no technique. We're trying to go down the road and the people get in front. What are you going to do? You don't stop on a dime.
What happened, officer?
That doesn't count. Bricks. That don't count.
Somebody threw a brick at you, officer?
Yes, sir.
Right here? As you were driving through?
Right.
One of the motorcycle police officers says someone threw a brick at him. I was here at the time. I didn't see anything thrown. Army helicopters coming in low, keeping constant surveillance, keeping the various command posts, military, police, and obviously presidential, advised as to what's going on. One helicopter now is in real low. Military police helicopter up on the rise of this highway section. Young people are holding an American flag upside down. A handful of police officers has succeeded in clearing at least half of this roadway, and traffic is flowing again. A Washington, D.C. bus has just arrived. Police officers wearing white riot helmets come out of the bus. They snap on their helmets. Integrated police team. The demonstrators are fleeing. The police officers are carrying or wearing their tear gas masks. The tactic this morning, the citywide tactic obviously, is to keep the demonstrators on the run.
With almost everybody who wants to get inside the Pentagon already inside, as you make a ring around, you see only half dozen young people sitting quietly, placidly across the street from the river entrance to the Pentagon. Now, are you surprised to find yourselves the only ones here?
Yes. There'll be more people later, though, like I said before.
You sure?
Oh, I'm positive. This is where people want to come to.
How do you explain the fact that you're the only ones here so far?
Because there was other things to be done. They had to stop the traffic from getting here first. I think that was the first objective, and then I think now they'll try to get here.
Well, look, there are supposed to be thousands, and there are only 6 of you.
There's thousands of Marines and thousands of cops, too.
It's easy to get over in small groups, but large crowds really have a rough time. They get busted before they get over.
If you do not move back where you were, you'll be placed under arrest.
You saying that officially, that if
Yes.
we do not move,
Right on.
we're
If you don't go back on the other side.
We're here to take the tour.
We don't have any tours.
That's not what I was told.
Be
There's
a bit
tours through the Pentagon all the time. Where do we go to find out about the tours?
I'm telling you, there's no tours.
Will you give that to us in writing? That there are no tours in the Pentagon?
I tell hundreds of people each day there's no tours. You don't have to write it.
There are never any tours through the Pentagon.
No conducted tours unless you make previous arrangements.
Now, how did you get here?
I came by boat on the Potomac River.
Is this your boat?
Yes.
Would you describe it?
It's a one-man kayak.
Well, it must be pretty hard to get here if you're the only demonstrator in front of the Pentagon and you had to come by kayak.
No, I'm sure I could have driven a whole lot easier.
Yeah, but anyway, this man is wearing orange, what do you call them, Mae West, is that what you have on?
He's the life preserver.
A life preserver and a white crash helmet, and he carried a green kayak from the Potomac River onto the grounds of the Pentagon. What are you going to do now?
Go back to the Potomac River. Maybe paddle across and go through the reflecting pool, then back upstream.
But surely you must have expected to meet a lot of other people here.
Yes, I did. I'm kind of disappointed.
Washington is literally girded in a series of expressways. And as they come into the city, they overlap in many places. So many places that it seems that wherever the police go to move demonstrators, demonstrators are still able to move elsewhere.
All the pigs came running out and just spraying mace and grabbing people, and they just got them all over to the side, and it was over as fast as it started.
Were they careful about who they maced?
No. There was a priest up there I saw. There were some straight-looking people. You know, they were just. I mean, they were macing them in the back. You know, which I can't dig. You know, I mean, they were already running, and they were chasing them with the mace in their hair and in their ears and the back of their neck. And there's, you know, they were running away, not towards.
And they maced them in the back.
Yeah, I mean, they all were being maced in the back. The march never went forward. It was always being back down here as a retreat, and instantly it was like stopped and turned around, and the whole time they were just macing them in the back.
I see you wearing Red Cross insignia. You're part of the medical cadre of the demonstration?
Yes.
2 police officers just grabbed 2 demonstrators. They were just walking. Officers are now searching the pockets of the demonstrators. One demonstrator is forced to lean over a stone wall. The search is peaceful but unprovoked. Tear gas is being fired outside the Department of Agriculture. There weren't a lot of demonstrators here, but when the police moved out, they grabbed as many long-haired young people as they could find, grabbed them, and search them, put them up against walls, buses, cars, search them. Today in the nation's capital, it is a crime to be young and have long hair.
I think that's an example of excellent scene setting. You could really picture it, couldn't you? What was going on, and the sound of the helicopters and so on. You felt you really were there as it was happening. That's one of the excellent examples of documentary production. So this concludes this section of my presentation. If you have questions about this part, you can put them in the chat, and we'll answer them at the end of the program. Since Daemen College is the mission of Daemen, let me start again. Since the mission of Daemen College is to prepare creative, ethically minded leaders for a diverse and interconnected world, let's now look at the power of radio in development, specifically the work of developing radio partners in Africa. This is the country in the background is Rwanda, the land of 1,000 hills, they call it. We begin working in a country with a 5-day workshop, and we give participants a digital recorder and mic and teach them how to use them. Content specialists make presentations, and the participants go into the field to record pieces. And they come back and critique them. Here, Martha Zulu, our mentor, visits stations to develop their skills further. It's intentional that we have a woman as a trainer, and she also speaks all the local languages. So these are impressive results of the impact of radio programming. The religious leaders are often very influential in the community, and so getting them on your side is really important. This is Florence, who became a child bride to a man 10 years older when she was 16. She found it to be physically and emotionally abusive. When she listened to the youth-friendly health services program, Let's Shine, Florence said, "It gave me the courage to get out of the mess I was in." Her mother was also listening and said, "I wanted her to feel welcome and loved when she got home. I also wanted to make sure to keep the reproductive health conversation going between us so she doesn't have an early pregnancy." Florence is one of many girls rescued from child marriages, due in part to the health program started by DRP. The hoe is a basic tool in farming and will probably remain that for some time to come. So the only way to improve livelihood is with information. Here, Ida learned how to conserve water so she would have it during drought and was able to earn more money when she sold her tomatoes. ERP also gives stations money for community activities, here used to plant trees, and many stations then work with local agencies to continue tree planting. Sometimes thousands of trees got planted that way. We send them weekly bulletins with an issue on one side and production tips and resources on the other side. You can check it out on the website of Developing Radio Partners. So we come full circle, don't we? Reporting from the field, just as they were doing in Wisconsin 70 years before. And when Ebola struck in Sierra Leone, students learned again by radio. Now we're going to take a deeper look at Sierra Leone because radio was so important there, and it's often on the bottom of development lists, and they've suffered so much. It's located, of course, on West Africa, has a population of over 7 million. The literacy rate is 47%, life expectancy 51 years. There are 245 doctors for 7 million people. During this decade-long civil war, 50,000 people were killed, and they also engaged 10,000 child soldiers. When Ebola broke out in 2014, over 4,000 died. Now there have been over 3,000 cases of COVID-19. It had only 79 deaths. They learned a lot from Ebola. The 41 stations in the independent radio network played a vital role in informing listeners about how to prevent getting the disease and how to treat it. These stations are the primary source of information because they're the most trusted, and they speak in local languages. So they had excellent interview programs with doctors, health officials. They ran spots. They ran little radio plays. Now let's take a walk in the street of Freetown. Imagine how to balance 6 baskets of charcoal. It's an amazing feat. This is the countryside, a market, a restaurant. Very few people have cars, so they depend on other means of transportation. No seatbelts there. But they all listen to radio as their primary source. I mentioned that they were often, limbs were cut and hands were cut and so on by the rebels using machetes, a horrific way to experience those kinds of things. So one rebel came out and said, we can't have peace without a radio station. And so Hassan Karoma created this radio station with support from the community. I like the voice of the people. It's not giving voice to people. Everyone has a voice. What radio does is amplify the voice. This is Hassan. This is Andrew Kroma, a remarkable man. He owns 2 commercial radio stations, and he's a real leader. I sensed that he had great leadership capability when I first went there and organized a trip for him to the United States to learn about public radio. And he's kind of like a natural leader, I thought. And here's an interview that Terry Gross had with him. We'll hear a little portion of that.
This is Fresh Air. I'm Terry Gross. Andrew Kroma founded an independent radio station in his country, Sierra Leone, 8 years ago, during its civil war. He now runs 2 stations. The one in Freetown, the capital city, has been burned down twice. The station in Bo, Sierra Leone's second largest city, has been attacked with gunfire and was temporarily closed down and forced into exile. That's just part of the punishment Kroma has faced for keeping listeners informed about corruption and atrocities. Kroma is often on the air, broadcasting from his station in Bo. He's one of the investigative reporters who reports under the house name of Mr. Owl. Kroma grew up in the bush and has studied in the U.S. at the University of Texas and Duke University. I spoke with him last week during his trip to the United States to study public radio here. I asked him about covering Sierra Leone's democratic election in 1996, when the rebels were mounting a campaign of terror to scare people away from voting. As part of this campaign, the rebels amputated the arms of thousands of men, women, and children. I asked Chroma how his station in Bow covered the story.
On the day of election, that was when we were on the air telling people to go out and vote. It is your right. You need it. You need a government. The military government need to go out. We don't need a military government. It's not democratic. That day we were shot at. The combatants came up to the station. It was just about 100 yards away. And the man who was standing beside me as a security was killed. I mean, this was like 2 feet away from me, and bullets kept coming up. So we had to tilt the microphone over the speaker of the VHF radio. We ran into the bush, and we were still broadcasting from the bush where guns were being fired. But the message at that time was to tell the people that go out and vote, because our broadcast was getting to the villages where voting was taking place. We didn't want that incident closer to our station to stop that. So we continued. People were being amputated. In fact, very close to the station, there was a village next door, not too far away. We could hear the people screaming. And but we still continue to be on the air to broadcast.
Did you try to warn people about the possibility of amputation?
Yes, we did. When we go on the air and we get information about danger areas, we tell people about those danger areas, and we are able to tell them where safer areas are due to the interviews we conduct.
Do you still see a lot of people walking around now who were amputated during that 96 election?
Oh, yes. Children, women. I personally have witnessed amputations. I thought I was going to be the next. We've seen these things happening, and we've interviewed victims. I mean, we are talking about, at the time, blood is dripping from the arm or the leg. We've interviewed them. We have also had the opportunity to interview the perpetrators, why they do it.
What are some of the things the perpetrators have told you?
Most of these people were just senseless. They didn't even know. They were just saying that the civilians don't like them, they don't support them, so there is going to be Operation No Living Thing. So I will ask them questions like, then how will you govern no living thing? I said, well, until we find out that people change. That's like, but is that the way you're going to get people to change? These are the hard questions that we ask. And the reason why you ask them is because you want them to give out pertinent information that people can know how these people perceive themselves.
Now, I understand that during the military takeover in 1997, that the citizens of Bow, where you live, refused to accept the rule of the rebels who had taken over. And that your radio station became the only source of information for the city, because the city was basically cut off from the rest of the country during this 9-month rule of the military?
Yes, it was a matter of deciding whether we should resume broadcasting or not. Because that area was being protected by the Civil Defense Force, so it was safe. It was safer for us to broadcast from there. And we used that radio station to tell the people that a military government is not your answer. To tell the people that you have the right to elect a civilian government, and that don't support that government at all. That was very brave of us. And we did that and did that. We became successful. People had a sit-down strike. Nobody went to work. We had to go into exile finally, and then resume broadcast again in 1998 when the democratically elected government was reinstalled.
Sierra Leone is a very dangerous place to practice journalism. It's probably particularly dangerous for you. You're both the founder of a radio station and an investigative reporter on that radio station. How do you protect yourself? Do you carry a gun?
No, you don't. What you carry is your ID to show that you are a reporter for the radio station.
But that's part of the reason why they want to hurt you, because they know you're a reporter.
Well, in most cases, when they want to hurt me, I tell you, if you hurt me, nobody is going to know what you want to do. I am here. You don't pay me. But I know you want people to know why you're cutting their hands. You want people to know why you are burning their houses. So if you kill me, how will people know how you perceive? That has been personally my survival.
As you can see, he was an extraordinary leader and very courageous man. You mentioned the independent radio network. Developing radio partners helped facilitate that, but we don't claim full credit for it because there's people like Andrew that really did it with his experience. But they went out into the countryside to listen to the people and find out what their concerns were. And they said, you know, the politicians are the ones that are dividing us. It was divided like North and South. So the coalition was formed to develop a series of requests or of issues that they wanted whoever got elected to address. So people take elections very seriously. You're waiting in rain in a long line. There were Search for Common Ground set up election monitors to make sure they were done properly and fairly and safely. This T-shirt says, "Women wake up early to vote." A lot of emphasis on women, empowering women. And this man even walked on his hands to vote. So Andrew was talking about seeing the people that have lost limbs. To me, this is an extraordinary photograph by Kate Kelly of amputees playing soccer. To me, this personifies resilience. No matter what happened to them, they're playing soccer. It's a photograph that I never can forget. Now, if you have questions about this section, again, put them on the chat. I'm going to move to just a concluding area. So with good radio, perhaps these boys won't be forced to dig for diamonds or be in the Civil War. And these girls will grow up healthy, safely, complete their educations. It's such a wonderful smile, isn't it? I just love that. These girls, so young, so optimistic. In spite of all the hardships, the people of Sierra Leone have a wonderfully positive spirit. It's just remarkable. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to share this with you. So again, if you have questions, we'll talk about that later. Now here's just a few things with Terry. This is Terry Gross when I first met her 43 years ago. And this is Terry today. And here she is accepting the Humanities Award from President Obama. Just think about that for a minute. The President of the United States giving the highest award in humanities to the host of a public radio program. It's an appreciation of the value of the cultural richness of the archives that Fresh Air has on the life of America and the subject she touches on. So, making it today now, this is poet Clint Smith. And this could be called since the killing of George Floyd, it really has finally awakened Caucasians to trying to listen and see life through the eyes of African Americans in many ways. And perhaps one of the more encouraging things is when people say, I had no idea that life was like that, or that they experienced life like that. So here's a segment with the poet, Lynn Smith, again, enabling us Caucasians to experience life through the eyes of a Black writer.
This is Fresh Air. As 2020 comes to an end, we ask Clint Smith what he's thinking about as he looks back at this year. He's a staff writer at The Atlantic. His book of poems, Counting Dissent, won the 2017 Literary Award for Best Poetry Book from the Black Caucus of the American Library Association. His forthcoming book, How the Word is Passed, explores how different sites across the country reckon with or fail to reckon with their relationship to the history of slavery. Here's Clint.
Obviously, a lot has happened this year, but what's top of mind for me as we end 2020 is the sort of racial reckoning that this country has experienced over the last several months and really over the last several years, both since George Floyd was killed and since Black Lives Matter has begun. And within that is this interrogation of Confederate monuments and memorials and statues, and should they be taken down? Should they stay up? And in 2017, in my hometown in New Orleans, we removed several statues and memorials of Confederates, including Robert E. Lee, Jefferson Davis, P.G.T. Beauregard, and those statues were taken down. And I began thinking about what does it mean that I grew up in this city, where there are names of hundreds of people who were Confederates or owned enslaved people that sort of ornament the iconography of the place I grew up in, this majority Black city. And what does it mean that we have a city that in many ways honored and memorialized enslavers more than it did the enslaved? So I began thinking of that and thinking about how different places across the country, including my own hometown, to what extent are these places being honest about their relationship to this history, and to what extent are they hiding from it? And this ultimately became the book that I've written that comes out next year, which is a narrative nonfiction book. But with me, all things begin in poetry. And, that's how I was trained as a writer. And so while the book is a narrative nonfiction project, the poems are the things that help me ask the questions. And so I wanted to share a poem that I wrote and have been writing in many ways for the last few years that served as a sort of entry point to this interrogation. Because we can take down these monuments, but if we don't address what led the monuments to be put up in the first place, then we're not actually solving the issue. Growing up, the iconography of the Confederacy was an ever-present fixture of my daily life. Every day on the way to school, I passed a statue of P.G.T. Beauregard riding on horseback, his Confederate uniform slung over his shoulder, and his military cap pulled far down over his eyes. As a child, I did not know who P.G.T. Beauregard was. I did not know he was the man who ordered the first attack that opened the Civil War. I did not know he was one of the architects who designed the Confederate national flag. I did not know he led an army predicated on maintaining the institution of slavery. What I knew is that he looked like so many of the other statues that ornamented the edges of this city, these copper garlands of a past that saw truth as something that should be buried underground and silenced by the soil. After the war, the sons and daughters of the Confederacy reshaped the contours of treason into something they could name as honorable. They called it the lost cause, and it crept its way into textbooks that attempted to cover up a crime that was still unfolding. They told us that Robert E. Lee was an honest man, guilty of nothing but fighting for the state and the people that he loved, that the Southern flag was about heritage and remembering those slain fighting to preserve their way of life. But see, the thing about the lost cause is that it's only lost if you're not actually looking. The thing about heritage is that it's a word that also means I'm ignoring what we did to you. I was taught the Civil War wasn't about slavery, but I was never taught how the declarations of Confederate secession had the promise of human bondage carved into its stone. I was taught that the war was about economics, but I was never taught that in 1860, the 4 million enslaved Black people were worth more than every bank, factory, and railroad combined. I was taught that the Civil War was about states' rights, but I was never taught how the Fugitive Slave Act could care less about a border and spell Georgia and Massachusetts the exact same way. It's easy to look at a flag and call it heritage when you don't see the Black bodies buried behind it. It's easy to look at a statue and call it history when you ignore the laws written in its wake. I come from a city abounding with statues of white men on pedestals and Black children playing beneath them, where we played trumpets and trombones to drown out the Dixie song that still whistled in the wind. In New Orleans, There are over 100 schools, roads, and buildings named for Confederates and slaveholders. Every day, Black children walk into buildings named after people who never wanted them to be there. Every time I return home, I drive on streets named for those who would have wanted me in chains. Go straight for 2 miles on Robert E. Lee. Take a left on Jefferson Davis. Make the first right on Claiborne. Translation, go straight for 2 miles on the general who slaughtered hundreds of Black soldiers who were trying to surrender. Take a left on the president of the Confederacy who made the torture of Black bodies the cornerstone of his new nation. Make the first right on the man who permitted the heads of rebelling slaves to be put on stakes and spread across the city in order to prevent the others from getting any ideas. What name is there for this sort of violence? What do you call it when the road you walk on is named for those who imagined you under a noose? What do you call it when the roof over your head is named after people who would have wanted the bricks to crush you?
Clint Smith is a staff writer at The Atlantic. He's the author of the poetry collection Counting Dissent and the forthcoming narrative nonfiction book How the Word is Passed.
I think this also illustrates the power of radio, of audio, of being able to see deeper almost, because there are no pictures. Just the words, the voice, the human voice is so expressive. Each medium has its own forms of intimacy. It's forms of expressing that. And I just want to give you these examples. And now, just to conclude, here's an example of how the archives of Fresh Air are really extensive, over 40 years. And so when someone passes, he can draw upon a series of interviews. And this is with the children's author and illustrator Maurice Sendak.
Today we've been listening back to 4 interviews I recorded with Maurice Sendak, the beloved children's book author and illustrator. He died this morning at the age of 83. Let's get back to the interview we recorded last September. We've talked before about how you're Jewish, but you're very secular. You don't believe in God. You don't.
No, I don't.
Yeah, and I think having friends who die, getting older, getting closer toward the end of life, tests people's faith, and it also tests people's atheism. It sounds like your atheism is staying strong.
Is what?
Staying strong.
Yes. I'm not unhappy about becoming old. I'm not unhappy about what must be. It makes me cry only when I see my friends go before me and life gets emptied. I don't believe in an afterlife, but I still fully expect to see my brother again. And it's like a dream life. I am reading a biography of Samuel Palmer, which was written by a woman in England. I can't remember her name. And it's sort of how I feel now when he was just beginning to gain his strength as a creative man and beginning to see nature. But he believed in God, you see, and he believed in heaven, and he believed in hell. Goodness gracious, that must have made life much easier. It's harder for us non-believers, but, there's something I'm finding out as I'm aging, that I am in love with the world. And I look right now, as we speak together, out my window in my studio, and I see my trees, my beautiful, beautiful maples that are hundreds of years old. They're beautiful. And you see, I can see how beautiful they are. I can take time to see how beautiful they are. It is a blessing to get old. It is a blessing to find the time to do the things, to read the books, to listen to the music. I don't think I'm rationalizing anything. I really don't, since this is all inevitable and I have no control over it. Bumbelardi was a combination of the deepest pain and the wondrous feeling of coming into my own. And it took a long time. It took a very long time, but it's genuine. unless I'm crazy. I could be crazy, and you could be talking to a crazy person.
I don't think so.
I don't know anymore, and I don't care.
What are your physical restrictions like? Can you walk okay? Can you get around?
No,
at
I
all?
can't walk or can. I'd love to walk. That's why I've been doing that since the 70s when I had my first coronary. I had heart trouble, and I've had very bad time after Eugene died, and I was very sick, and I thought I would die, and I came back to do Bumblearty, and I have nothing but praise now, really, for my life. I'm not unhappy.
Mm-hmm.
I cry a lot because I miss people. I cry a lot because they die and I can't stop them. They leave me, and I love them more. But I have my young people here, 4 of them, who are studying, and they look at me as somebody who knows everything. Oh, poor kids. If they only knew how little I know, but obviously I give off something that they trust, because they're all intelligent. Oh, God, there are so many beautiful things in the world which I will have to leave when I die, but I'm ready.
Well, listen,
I have to tell you something.
Go ahead.
You are the only person I have ever dealt with in terms of being interviewed or talking to who brings this out in me. There is something very unique and special in you, which I so trust. When I heard that you were going to interview me, you wanted to, I was really, really pleased.
Well, I'm really glad we got the chance to speak, because when I heard you had a book coming out, I thought, what a good excuse to call up Maurice Sendak and have a chat.
Yes, that's what we always do, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's what we've always done.
It is.
Thank God we're still around to do it.
Yes.
And almost certainly I'll go before you go, so I won't have to miss you.
Oh, God, what a...
And I don't know whether I'll do another book or not. I might. It doesn't matter. I'm a happy old man. But I will cry my way all the way to the grave.
Well, I'm so glad you have a new book. I'm really glad we had a chance to talk.
I am too.
And I wish you all good things.
I wish you all good things. Live your life, live your life, live your life.
I hear this. Every time I hear this, I have tears. And perhaps you have some tears now too. Maybe just take a pause to reflect on that. Now, if you had some questions, we can
Thank you, Bill.
talk about them.
Thank you. Yes. We'll be moderating a Q&A, just a brief introduction here again, in case anyone came on late. My name is Dan Shanahan, professor at Daemen College. And Bill, just an absolutely terrific conversation, and what a wonderful way to end it with that really poignant quote. And it, thinking of that quote, I really can kind of link it back to something you said very early in the conversation, which is that you viewed NPR as essentially kind of an open source university, or a place where a gallery or a cultivation of thought doesn't end at actual walls. And it made me really consider, my first experience with NPR. And I was in my early 20s. I was working in a shipping warehouse, and it was bleak. It was intellectually bleak. It was aesthetically bleak. The job was repetitive and deadening. And I would listen to NPR. And there was a program that's still running called On Point. This was hosted by the previous individual before Tom Ashbrook. And it would bring into that space philosophers and politicians and economists and poets. And it was painful in one way to hear people living these exciting, dynamic lives while I felt I was existing within a very claustrophobic space. But it made me recognize very early on that was not where I had to be. And I really think NPR was one of those kind of access points for me that people need when they're not in a place of kind of intellectual privilege, or they're not being exposed to galleries, and they don't have the money to be admitted into these spaces. NPR really creates this extremely open, democratic platform where these thoughts can come through. So I think you just did an absolutely terrific job with that vision and mission, and it's really tremendous to see how it all came to fruition. So we're having quite a few questions coming in for you, Bill. So I'm going to get into it right off the bat. If we can go back to those very early days when you were considering what type of programming that you wanted to initiate, when we're looking at All Things Considered and Fresh Air, can you talk a little bit about what you were considering in terms of programming and what was guiding your thoughts on how to develop programming?
Now that's a good question, but I really felt, in a way, it was giving flesh to what I had written, to making those ideas come alive. There was much more to the purpose of the statement than what I just read, and they were talking about the different aspects of it. But so many times we've just thought of news as this just happened, and that dominates. But yet there's so much else in the cultural life that isn't there. Farrell Getty, in his thing on poetry, said, poetry is the frontier for news. In other words, the idea is really coming first, and it's a wonderful, that's what I was thinking of with All Things Considered. It should be the arts, human experiences, and voices, as I said, that ordinarily aren't heard on the air. So those were some of the things I wanted to do, was to emphasize those things that aren't considered news, that no one else is covering, and to do it in an engaging way.
And you were able to provide it in a kind of a long format where
yes,
so much of news that many of us encounter is dictated by a quick commercial break, a sound bite, short attention, sort of geared towards a short attention span. And when you listen to a Terry Gross interview, I think why she is able to get such thoughtful comments is because the people do not feel rushed. They have an open format to really explore ideas. And I think you can then get to some very unexpected places that way.
Right.
We have another question in terms of leadership. You brought up a comment that you saw yourself very much like a conductor in an orchestra. This question is, what steps did you take to become a leader in those early days of NPR, when people didn't really know what it was that you were necessarily up to, and this was all very much an open experiment?
Yeah, I was never self-consciously trying to be a leader. I just felt I was part of a group of people that were trying to discover some new paths to walk down or make. And so I always felt it was very collaborative. And I think that's the way I've always worked. When I was manager of WHYY here, we'd have Monday morning staff meetings. We'd sit around in a circle. So we would all talk about things in a kind of equal way, if you will. It's not to say that people didn't know that I was in charge. But feedback I've gotten is that I really listen to people a lot and would offer constructive criticism. But I think it's a matter of who you are and how you are with people that is important.
This question builds on this idea of, I think, giving many people voices. This individual, I think, has followed your career for quite some time, Bill. The question is, do you feel that your interviews with Fruit Belt residents all those years ago better prepared you for what boiled over with race in these last few years?
Well, I had hoped that we had moved beyond that. Certainly those were very early um, conversations about what it's like to be a Black person. We were just beginning to scratch the surface in a way compared to the depth of which we have now, looking into history, systemic racism, and so on. But those things were there then. And for me, it was a real education, and I'm grateful for that. But it continues on today, fortunately more in a louder voice.
We talk often in classes with entrepreneurism about the power of a mission statement and having a cohesive vision early on, which you use that as your kind of compass to guide you. And as one of your early stats shows, NPR has grown significantly since it was first founded. This question here speaks to that. Do you think the NPR today has kept to its mission statement that you wrote all those years ago?
Yes. I'm not trying to puff myself up, but when I visit NPR, they tell me that they think the mission statement is more relevant today than when I wrote it 50 years ago.
Early on in the conversation, you were talking about NPR within the U.S. financial system. 70% often comes from corporate and underwriting. This question is interested in the financing of the radio stations that were happening in sub-Saharan Africa, in particular Sierra Leone. How do those stations finance themselves, and how are they able to deliver the services that they deliver?
They do get grants sometimes from international agencies, but a lot of times it's selling spots. I need a ride to Freetown, or I'm looking for a job doing this. They charge 50 cents for those things, and it adds up. So it is community supported in that way. And there are advertisers. There are corporations or businesses that want to be advertising on those stations too.
This question here, I think, was prompted by the the longer audio clip you showed with the demonstrations that were about to occur. The question is, does a live broadcast from a protest without video have a greater impact than a more modern one would that is filled with video documentation?
Well, there's a place for both of those, of course. And I don't think there was I'm sure there was no better audio documentation of that day than what we produced. And I just think each medium has its own strengths. I mean, the January 6th storming of the Capitol, that couldn't have been done nearly as well on audio or radio as it was there, because it was such violence, and to see the people and the way in which the Capitol was being invaded was extraordinary. So in that case, it really was better served by video.
Yeah, and really sort of filtered through Instagram and other social media posts on in real time on the ground, which is such a different kind of quality. This question is speaking a little bit more to this sort of the educational component of radio. Question is, how can we use radio in the classroom with young people of all ages to bring in that first person experience that that you spoke about as being so crucial to the early founding vision of NPR?
Well, there are educational, now it would be probably podcasts that are made. I think you could probably find podcasts that would do that. I would check that out. It's harder to do that for broadcast nowadays because it is a narrow casting. It's a smaller audience.
And now, kind of looking at where we are in the radio in a sort of a contemporary context, this question is asking, do you think radio today has substantially progressed, or do you think radio today has lost some of its strength from where it began?
Radio per se, as a radio set, is probably not familiar with many of the students. And perhaps their first memory of listening to NPR was in a car seat as their mother was going to the grocery store. But I would say we're living in the age of audio. So we spread that out. And as I mentioned, it's on all these different platforms now, radio is, and streaming, and you can listen to it whenever you want, most programs. So I think when you have the most venerable print publications, the New Yorker and the New York Times doing radio, you know that they're paying attention to the medium.
And also, you can see how you brought up the comparisons to the print and the radio, and how there's quite a bit of similarity. And now we see New York Times creating their own spin-off podcast where audio and the interview supports the journalism that they're doing. And you can also see again the influence of the NPR radio program on the contemporary podcast. I'm thinking of Ira Glass and just his tone and his approach to the interview process, and how that has created a whole kind of slew of people who are influenced by that approach.
Right, and that was one of the most influential things in podcasting. One program they did, remember?
Let me just get to another one here. So this question is going into. Let me just I'm going back and forth through the chat and the notes here. Really, what this is talking really to the skill sets. What do you think makes the skill sets of a person who can have a lasting career in radio?
I think it's not, as I say, hands-on kind of skills of editing or something like that. I think curiosity is very important, because you keep tracking down a story until you get to the root of it, and just the whole world is open to you to be curious about. And I find that one of the best things. And when I was looking for people, when I hired people, and I could tell more by talking with them than by necessarily reading their resume. When I was interviewing people for a on-air position, I would listen to their tape before I looked at their resume, because the listener wouldn't know if they went to a prestigious school or whatever that might alter the way they would hear it.
Mm-hmm. And this one I think is particularly relevant right now. How, in your opinion, how does NPR maintain their neutrality of opinion without inserting bias into their reporting? And that's certainly a hallmark of NPR and how they cover it. They don't just pay lip service to being fair and balanced. I think we can see that in the reporting and the way that they handle it. How has that been maintained?
Well, they work at that very hard. It's like number one in their story selection and all that kind of thing. And, at this point, they don't need to have climate change deniers on or flat earth people. I mean, there are established facts now, but that's the most important thing that they do, is try to be balanced. And it's not equal time necessarily, because that's too hard to measure, but it certainly is fairness.
Okay. So,
and treating people with respect.
Well, thank you so much. That concludes the questions on the chat, and I think what the questions are really speaking to, Bill, is just what a diverse organization you've created. It started with this kind of very, very tight-knit mission statement, and you've stayed true to it. But at the same time, the complexity of the organization and the way that it's touched so many people, and then the work that you've done in Sierra Leone is just remarkable. And to see the whole kind of arc within one presentation, I think really hits that home. So I want to really thank you for taking the time to do the presentation, and for answering the questions from the many guests who are out there.
It's an honor to be a part of this.
Thank you so much, Bill. I'm going to just turn it over to Dr. Robert Waterhouse for some closing remarks. And Bill, once again, thank you so much for a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I have one last question for you, Bill, and it's about misinformation. I wondered if you'd care to speak to that. There is so much, as we know, misinformation on social media. There are stations that are on radio and the TV and other media stations that are very biased indeed on both sides of the political spectrum.
It's the greatest threat to our democracy.
Could you say more about that,
Yeah,
please?
because you can't come to the right conclusions with the wrong information. And if it's a false reality you're creating, there's no way you can talk with people because it's a different reality. And the perpetuation of the big lie continues. I mean, that's the frightening part, that millions of people still believe the big lie that the election was stolen. And Mr. Trump reiterated that yesterday in this gathering in Florida. It's very scary. I think it's extremely scary. You can have different opinions. You know, there are different opinions about the Vietnam War and things like that, but this is a different reality and an intentional lie.
Yeah, of course, yes, we see leaders, totalitarian leaders, and coups work to fasten their hold on the media first in order to disseminate. So, how to combat that is a very provocative question.
So, if anyone wants to get in touch with me, you're welcome to do so.
Thank you, Bill. But Bill, most of all, I want to thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us and your reflections with us. I've heard you talk before, and every time I've heard you talk, I've been moved, I've been inspired, I've been rejuvenated. And to have you as the inaugural speaker of our new program in leadership and entrepreneurship in the arts has just been a tremendous boost, a thrill. So thank you. So I want to thank you again for coming. And if I can direct those on the Zoom looking for further information to go to daemen.edu/LEA. Bill Siemering, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Warm wishes. The new major in leadership and entrepreneurship in the arts is designed to help creatives and even business-minded students find one of the 11.4 million jobs in the cultural sector in the United States.
Working in the arts and cultural sector is extremely rewarding, but it's extremely challenging as well. And so the reason why Daemen is an appropriate place to be training students to excel within this sector is because we're going to give the fundamental knowledge of management principles, organizational principles, and combine that with the knowledge of the arts and cultures.
Western New York has an incredibly rich cultural history,
ranging from world-class symphonies and art galleries to local theater companies and smaller experimental galleries and film and media centers. One of our aims is to connect students with the executive directors and leadership positions within the arts and cultural sector in Western New York. So these are the relationships that this program will have with leaders outside of the campus.
We have partnerships with a number of professional companies in town, the Greater Buffalo Cultural Alliance, the Theatre Alliance of Buffalo, Art Services Initiative, 43 North, Buffalo Philharmonic Orchestra, galleries big and small.
The arts and cultural sector benefits from having strong leaders, and that's what we'll be preparing. As we continue to move into challenging times within the arts and cultural sector, we're going to need to have experienced leaders who have that bedrock skills that we are providing within this program.
The one-on-one mentorship that students get here at Daemen College is top-notch. You see faculty who are themselves artists in their own right mentor individual students. We pride ourselves on our rapport with students, and that, especially that one-on-one mentorship.
This program requires small classrooms, hands-on approach. It's going to need to have that balance of both sort of direct lecture, but also a laboratory setting where students are able to take their skill sets and apply it to a project-based learning experience. So Daemen allows for the student to have that hands-on approach. In addition, Daemen is 1 mile from downtown, and that boasts an enormous advantage to this program so that it's easy for us to facilitate internships and relationships with the many interesting, exciting, relevant, and diverse cultural players that are operating within our community.
We live in a world full of opportunity, and it's changing every day. But when you realize the world isn't where you want it to be, it's time to build your legacy. Higher education has the power